thank you for agreeing to do this and to be unfiltered. So I want to jump right in, and I want to talk about a few really important topics. We have so much to talk about in only 1 hour. You and I could probably talk for 4 hours. The first thing I want to talk about is food justice and how it fits in with racial inequality. Can you kind of talk about that?
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. In the spirit of talking about food justice, I just really want to say and almost I would love to take an 8-minute and 47-second pause to acknowledge George Floyd, but Black Lives Matter. And at the heart of this food justice work is really about education and not asphyxiation. And whether it's a knee on your neck or communities that are being choked by bad food, dirty air, lack of resources, this work that we do supports a greater good. So the bottom line is this: Americans in poverty are dying as much as 15 years earlier than their peers. That's not me, that's the CDC. The life expectancy in the United States is now the 37th country in the world for life expectancy. So when we think about what that means as a nation that is becoming increasingly more black and brown, really food justice matters. You know, our good friend Eric Adams says it best. You know, it's not so much DNA, it's dinner. It's not birthdays, it's breakfast, and it's no longer lineage, it's lunch. It's what we are doing to communities and how we treat them that really will determine better outcomes for all.
Thank you. And I want to get, more specific. You grew up in the South Bronx, you have 2 masters in education, and you ended up working in what you describe as, quote, the most dysfunctional high school in all of New York City. Why were you assigned to the school? How did that happen?
Well, so yes, I'm a Bronx native. I started my work at South Bronx High School. For those who don't know, my wife and I belong to a club that I'm sure many other listeners or watchers also belong to. We have lost children both before birth and after. And after the death of our son, the passing of our son, I wound up just needing to be as close to my home physically as possible. And just went into the DOE system. I'd been working for years, 20 years as an educator, and picked the school that had a vacancy closest to my home so I could literally walk to work and walk home. That was the sole requisite for the job. Lo and behold, I found myself at the most dysfunctional school in all of New York City, which was Walton High School at the time. Why is it dysfunctional? Well, we had 18 armed police officers in the school and 48 school safety agents, along with 18 deans of discipline. Think about what that cost. We had 256 felonies committed in the building the year that I signed on to that school, and a 17% graduation rate. So therein itself speaks to data that is so wholly unacceptable, and to think that that was perpetuated and that, we're going to have an education system that is built on policing children before we educate them, to me was wholly unacceptable. So I wound up at that school at that juncture in my life because of a personal tragedy. Wow.
And then, what's been happening, in the South Bronx in the last few months with COVID-19? I know you and I have talked about this before, but just for people listening, some of your descriptions, and I read them on our last webinar, which to me, I couldn't read without choking up. And maybe you could sort of describe what you saw, what you're seeing, and I think potentially that these problems are still, while everybody's opening and feeling good and walking around the streets, there's still some huge issues.
So to me, the coronavirus, or the COVID crisis, if you will, is symptomatic of 3 larger viruses. Number 1, it is the virus of racism, the virus of greed, and the virus of corruption. And this virus is literally an X-ray into society where we very clearly see what our priorities are, who they are, and who they are not. In terms of on the ground, realize we have communities that are under siege. And what I mean by under siege, if you're food challenged in the first place, imagine what it's like now with supermarkets not opening, with people not being able to get out, and with no access to fresh food. That really impacts, again, communities of color. What do we also know? We know that the greatest way to boost your immunity is to have access to healthy, fresh food. And what are we seeing less of? Less of the availability of healthy, fresh food. Fruit stands aren't opening. People are buying more packaged food in one lump sum and, filling up on Pop-Tarts and cereal and rice than they are on the things that are really going to build healthier immune systems. To understand.
I was just going to ask about the supermarkets because, I mean, we know that there's been movements in New York City to support supermarkets. Have there been a lot of closures or what's going on?
There have been some closures. There's been, without school, you don't have employees. Without employees, you can't open. There's also security. There's also in public housing, it is so dense, 45,000 people in 8 square blocks. So with restricted hours, you got lines in supermarkets for hours. And what do you do by default? You go to the gas station, and you're getting boxes of Pop-Tarts and bags of chips. You're going to the drugstore. It is just insane to see. And then there are bigger issues around density, around children not having access to the house, around this whole notion of distance learning. And listen, let us not confuse the new Green Deal with the new Screen Deal. So many people don't have access to the internet, don't have devices. So this whole notion of distance learning has created a whole new paradigm of problems for people. It's just mind-numbing. We've had in community, part of our time is really spent helping people. We've had over two dozen deaths in my immediate circle of friends, family, and colleagues. We've had to tell children their teachers have died. We have children who have undocumented relatives who have passed away and have had to help them claim bodies. And we're terrified of ICE. We're terrified of everything else that's going on. You never know who is knocking on your door for what. So the complications in communities like ours.
Can you talk about ICE for a second? Because I remember that coming up.
Right, people are mortified. Right, people are mortified about immigration police, about being, all this whole notion of fear, which is probably a separate topic, but understand that, and then being exacerbated by this very tragic moment with George Floyd. My goal is really for us as a nation to go from a tipping point to a turning point, and to really see how we can heal ourselves and grow new communities. But the challenges in marginalized communities and low-income communities, where these people are also essential workers and the frontline workers, are just Herculean. Just Herculean.
So you paint a pretty grim picture,
So let me, on the flip side, if I do paint a grim,
no, but I want to ask one more
let me
final
celebrate
thing.
the heroes I see daily.
Is that still going on now? Right. In this last week, are these issues still? Has there been any reduction, increase in food supply? Supermarkets.
So every week, thank God, there is an increase in accessibility. Every week, there is an increase in information. Every week, there is an increase in networking. And that networking and community coming together has really been game-changing. And let me really shout out the faith-based community, people of the book, of any book of which you read. The faith-based community in our community has been magnificent in terms of galvanizing people, having a level of trust, and communicating with people. So a huge shout out to the faith. Sure.
Some examples.
So I could talk about my dear friend, Ms. Gwendolyn Primus, in the heart of Claremont Village, who has activated churches to come together, is spreading access information, letting people know when, where, and how they can access food, also getting people to help other people. For example, we're serving, part of the work that we're doing now with Green Bronx Machine is making sure that these food insecure cancer patients who are tethered to oxygen, sometimes 20 stories up in a building, have access to food. So we are really using our community to come together.
Steven, but, when I think about this, I feel, and again, nothing, I think that Catherine Garcia and Kate McKenzie, with what they've been given, have been, feeding an entire city with 25% food insecurity, are doing an amazing job. But why are you
off to the PEBT program?
But why are you the one filling in these gaps? It scares me. And it's also ad hoc. It wasn't planned. It's not like someone's relying on you. You picked up slack, I believe, where it existed. So, that makes me nervous when it's not organized or coordinated. Not that you're not organized or coordinated, but that you saw these gaps, these gaping holes, and you had to go in and fill them. And what other huge gaps are left out there that you can't, it's like a life raft. You only have so many hands. You're not an octopus.
Absolutely. So I'd be lying to say that there weren't gaps before of all of this. So this crisis has really exacerbated the gaps. But to that extent, it's also made us realize that we are the ones we are waiting for, that it really has to be community-based. We don't need saviors. What we need is good policy, good people, and the opportunity to come together. And we're getting better at that each and every day. And that to me is really what's awesome. That to me is really what's awesome.
So
It's
just
a
switching a
huge
few.
city. I can't, I marvel at how big the city is, at how big the infrastructure is. So you can't turn a cruise ship on a dime, and I'm very cognizant of that. But, we can be a bunch of nimble little tugboats. And that's where the value of community organizers and people on the ground and small organizations are in many ways far more effective than the big ones.
And do you think that this should be some sort of organizational coordination effort? Because I feel like I agree with you. Like, I had this conversation with a food policy colleague about, one person, who's very smart and very involved in hunger said, well, I said, well, 40% of the food pantries and soup kitchens are closed and so forth. And they were like, well, those are the small ones and the big ones are still very active. And the other food policy colleague said, well, you got to be careful with that because some of these small mom and pop food distribution centers and food pantries are where people feel most comfortable. And in a crisis situation, you don't want people to have to go to places that they feel uncomfortable, especially if they're undocumented or especially if they're concerned about all these other
virus,
things.
especially if they have children. Realize, sometimes go big or go home is not the way to go. I think we learned that with Earl Butz and the policies in the 70s and the 80s. Go big or go home is not the answer. And if you traditionally look at the most equitable food justice movement organizers, it is the small stakeholders that produce the most variety and the most efficiency, along with the fairest distribution of wealth and opportunity.
Yeah, but I do feel, Stephen, that there's a miss here, with food policy. I feel that, with food policy, it feels so disorganized. It feels like I look at the Black Lives, Matter movement, and I think, wow, look at this organization. Food policy around food-related issues and food insecurity, there's no organization. There's no feel of outrage. There's no, in my opinion, and I think there should be. Why isn't there a coordinated effort, or am I missing something? Is there a coordinated effort?
I feel that people who want to coordinate, so I feel very welcome to coordinate with people, and I've been able to do that. And I think it involves sometimes putting the priority before your organization, which is a whole nother talk about nonprofit work. Nonprofits really need to cooperate and collaborate or get out of the space totally. This selfish notion of my organization first before the communities which we serve has got to go away.
All right, so let's slow down because this is really important because you talk about this. We also talk about this a lot in private and really spurred this conversation to be unfiltered. So I have highlighted in my notes, responsible behavior by nonprofits. Like what's wrong with nonprofits these days? What's going on? And, again, nonprofits, a lot of it is about funding related issues, right? You're desperate to keep funded, right? Food banks often talk about how many pounds of food they serve, not the fewer pounds that they serve.
Right.
They talk about the more pounds they serve. I'll put that on your lap.
So, sure. So first and foremost, I do not want to speak ill of nonprofits. I don't believe there is anybody in the nonprofit space that has less than altruistic ambitions or really wants to do good work. But the more we abdicate this work towards nonprofits, the more we are taking the responsibility off policy, off procedure, off things. The work that we're doing daily should not be the exception. It should be the norm, and it should be built right into the most fundamental building block of society, and that is public education. Again, education, not asphyxiation. So when you have 75 groups competing for funding, for space, for real estate, and for salary in New York City around health, wellness, and nutrition, oh my God, what a waste of time. What a waste of energy. Let's talk about someone who really is the key to all of these organizations, a local hero like George Edwards. And a big shout out to him, who is a New York City Department of Education employee. If this city had 15 more George Edwards, we would not need 75 nonprofits. And where would he be doing the work? Right inside public schools. You know, we're seeing nonprofits, because they have these great lofty missions, really drain talent from where it's needed most, public schools. And then it becomes an albatross on the back of public schools to get them in.
So I want to expand on this, because this is really important, and it's part of yours, both of our mission that we both talk about. And I really consider Stephen a friend and a colleague, and and so forth. And we talk about these things in private. We thought it would be great to talk about them in public. So one of the things that I often talk about, and you do too, is why, I don't even get why food, nutrition, and gardening and growing food is not in every single public school. I know funding is tight, but I don't, I believe in math, I believe in science, I believe in reading and writing, I believe in all those things, but
as do I.
Nutrition and food, and that healthy food is a human right. And I don't understand.
Healthy food is a human right. And you can't.
But Stephen, you're an educator. You're an educator. You've been doing this for a long time. Okay.
For sure. I
don't know anything about the Department of Education. Okay. Why am I naive? Why isn't there, starting in kindergarten or even earlier, why aren't there grow gardens and actually production gardens in every school? All of this stuff, but I know that Kevin Froner I botch the name all the time, but Hunter Manhattan Science, he put a grow garden in. They're going to grow, I think, 10,000 pounds of food. They're distributing it to all these underserved communities. And, why isn't, it's not a light bulb genius idea. Why isn't that in every school in New York City? The kids could be growing food and bringing it home. Is that naive? Why? And
so I'm going to get a little more granular. According to the USDA, students who have access to a garden, whether it's a big garden or a little garden, students who have access to a school garden, schools report a 44% increase in the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables. Think of what that means. That means that you are fueling healthy bodies and healthy minds. Now, for a long time, people want to limit the challenge. I want to challenge the limits. So for a long time, these systems, the procurement system, the distribution system, has been working for a very small group of people serving a very large city. Now, with so much transparency and so much more understanding that nutrition, input equals output, we are seeing generations of children who are lost simply because of what they're being fed, and largely because of what they're being fed in school, where they're reliant on meals. So we have the knowledge. We now need to take that knowledge and move from intent to action. But the fact that so many nonprofits are also advocating for that is taking the responsibility on public schools. And public school, I got to teach them to read and write. What makes Green Bronx Machine and the work that I do so different than every other nonprofit in the space is that we are dedicated to whole school performance. I am not Stephen the spaghetti guy or Stephen the salad guy. I have a curriculum. We have a curriculum and a program that is aligned to daily instruction. It is a whole school program. It is plug and play. It teaches math, reading, writing, and science. I've seen gardening teach children reading, writing, math, patience, cooperation, process. Those are the things that are really important to public education. And most importantly, if children have access to healthy, fresh food at a young age, they develop a taste and an appetite and a palate for it.
Yeah, so we know that and we get that, but why? What am I missing about the budgets and the cost of weaving in and making a core curriculum? Food, nutrition, eating well, healthy living. Why isn't that so important, especially in these underserved communities, in every community in New York City?
Well, yeah, in every community around the world.
But I'm asking you because you have an inside track. Why? Why isn't it happening?
So I think for a long time, so it's no longer about maintaining the status quo. And I think we've got to move beyond that. And also, we've got to kind of take some of the profit out of nonprofit. A lot of this nonprofit work, it's become very lucrative to become a voice for change.
So are you saying that you think that because of all these nonprofits competing for funding, that they're taking the eye off the ball of the DOE so they don't have to do the work around this space?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Instead of, I'd much rather get 10 emails demanding that I support more funding for public education than these crazy appeals and these wonderful accolades that a lot of nonprofits, mine included, like to send out.
Right, but for instance, I mean, you charge for your curriculum, right? I mean, do you ever charge for it, or do you give it for free at times?
A little bit of both. So here's the deal.
Yeah.
We charge for our entire program, lifetime, $975. That's it. You're done. And what I did when we started to scale or operationalize the movement is I looked at some of the best foundations in the space. I looked at Grow NYC, who I'm a huge advocate for. I looked at Old Kids Foundation, an amazing organization. I looked at what their typical grants to schools were and said, how could you use that grant money not to grow vegetables and kids in spaghetti and Happy Meals and salad, which is very important. How could you do that aligned to public school performance? And then in the process of, so we created a program that literally fits in under $2,500 for a lifetime of support that is data-driven, that actually drives pedagogy, that principals see this work and say, wow, I want my teachers doing this. Now, can I do this on Mondays or Wednesdays after school? And the results have been spectacular. They've been spectacular for schools around data, around teacher retention, around teacher tenure, around teacher satisfaction, and most importantly,
I know, but Stephen, I agree with you all these things,
and that's me getting out of the way.
But if all this is true, why you think that it's solely because nonprofits are in the way? And because when I talk about this, I talk about this with Deputy Director Alex McCather. We have these discussions. I mean, it's not like we just sit around and philosophize. We sit down and we have these arguments, and healthy arguments around, hey, wellness in the schools. I don't understand. They charge, and Alex, will come back and say no, but they do great work, and I don't want to single them out.
Right. I don't want to single out any organization, and I think a lot of organizations do great work.
So
but
how do you?
You should have been staying in school to do it. Listen, you should be staying in school to do it. A lot of these people, they are reinventing themselves. If you look at how these nonprofits, and again, with the best of intentions, but the best of intentions, but it's usually a second career. They've done their tenure, they're getting their pension. In order to break the system and change the system, you have to be totally disruptive. And I think that is part and parcel of the work that we do at Green and many other small organizations.
Are we going to see in our lifetime, programming in schools that starts in kindergarten or before, and every year is as important as math, science, English, and language?
Absolutely. You're seeing it more and more.
No, but in the fabric, as a core, when you go to school, it's as important as everything else, and it's woven right into the fabric of the education.
You absolutely are. And realize, part of the school movement and school garden work is that everyone's advocating for these gardens, but no one wants to do the work. So, it's great to have a school garden, but if the kids aren't taking care of it, if the teacher's not taking care of it, it becomes an absolute albatross. And for me, that's, again, why I wanted to put the garden right in the classroom. I have a look at my house. I have a garden. I have a food forest in my home, something that sits in a classroom 365 days a year, is easy to use, is low cost, is scalable, is replicable, and becomes the smoke and mirrors, if you will, of pedagogy. Listen, I've grown a lot of vegetables, but what I've really grown is happy, healthy students, kids who are engaged in school thinking their job is to grow vegetables. And it's really not. Their job to go to school is to learn and to have access to healthy, fresh food. That's what this is about, and that's why I'm proud to do indoor gardening. I love outdoor gardening. I love it. But it's tough. It's tough in communities where there's violence. It's tough in communities where you're limited by seasonality. It's tough in communities where we are choking because the air and the environment is toxic. And you wouldn't want to give that food to a squirrel, much less a child, no matter how beautiful it looks. So what do we want to do? We want to grow healthy, safe food, healthy, safe students, and healthy, nurturing, green classrooms. Some of these organizations that are looking to capitalize on all this reso funding, that's great, but that is really being selfish.
Talk about reso funding. Let's talk about what that is.
It's government funding that, the borough presidents allocate. And people come up with these huge projects, and they're great, but that's not scalable for everybody. And this RESO-A funding, this capital infrastructure, people are saying, oh, we should do it for a garden. It's great for your organization, but quite frankly, it's really not so great for schools. It's cost heavy. And really, what do those schools really need? Those schools really need updated computers, updated technology, updated wiring, smart boards. And if some communities get it because they have parents who are really able to advocate and team up with some of these large nonprofits that are really for profit, what happens is communities that don't have strong voice because our parents are working 2, 3, and 4 jobs or don't speak English or don't have access to, to city council members in the facility and with ease as some others do, they continue to fall further and further and further behind. Listen, you give me $50,000, I'm not building you a school garden. As much as I love it, I'm putting in a computer classroom. I'm reducing. I'm looking at infrastructure. I'm reducing class size.
I'm confused. We just talked about how important nutrition education and weaving it into the core, and how important you say community gardens. I talk about production gardens.
I'm sorry, what?
I talk about production gardens, not just community gardens. I think just to clarify the difference, when I talk about production gardens, it's producing thousands and thousands of pounds of food, not just like a garden that people could, learn how to garden. It's about food production. So, and it is expensive. So you're saying that, because I thought we said before that would be important to be in every school, right?
It is important, but you get there in small steps. Listen, I know Kevin, Kevin, he's a visionary. But again, that work should be the norm, not the exception. But he's an exceptional principal. There are many exceptional principals. And then there are principals who are just struggling with the day-to-day demands of what public education is and the challenges therein. So the easiest thing to do, what makes the most sense, is really to have small indoor academic gardens that then become larger gardens. Realize production is a whole different thing too. And I'm not anti-production, but really I am pro-education, pro-classroom engagement. My students have scaled up. So case in point, at CS 55, we didn't come in growing thousands of pounds of food. We scaled up gradually. It wasn't me force feeding a program and pushing it down people's throat. It was really getting community buy-in, community engagement. And then, the program has grown exponentially, and it's grown by funding itself, by the positivity of which it has created. We haven't gotten a huge grant. We haven't gotten huge funds. And when I did get nice chunks of funding, the first thing that we did as an organization is give this programming away for free, including the technology, to schools so that we could create a better movement, a more equitable movement. And again, I looked at the way Whole Kids vets their grantees and the way Grow NYC vets theirs, and that's how we made our decisions. We've partnered with some of the large organizations in the space. And
it's
you know
10
what they
o'clock.
say? The work in public housing is too hard. Well, if it was too easy, it would have been done yesterday. The first thing these large organizations, they want to do is they want to come take a picture of your kids in your school, put it up on their website, and do a ton of social media about, wow, look at the communities we're serving. And then what do? They send you a first-year employee who, a person fresh out of college who's underpaid, can't figure out their own life, and you're asking them to go in and innovate in some of the most challenged communities in New York City? That's preposterous. That is preposterous.
Okay, so what exactly should we do? What are the policies? What do we need to do, first of all, for education? And I think it's about should we expect New York City to put more funding into some of these capital expenditures, like making sure there's a computer for every kid, making sure that every school, and you may say, no, but I'm still going to say, I think there should be a grow garden in every school.
There should be a grow garden. A production garden, I don't know about, but a grow garden,
no,
yeah.
That we can grow to. I'll give you that. We can grow to a production garden. And also our hydroponic indoors if there's no outdoor space. I think that should be woven into the fabric of the kids' education. Maybe it's just high schools. Maybe it's just middle school? I don't know those
First
answers.
1,000
I don't
days
know
of a
anything
child's
about.
life are the most important. Most habits are formed grades 3 to 6. I started this work with overage, undercredited children, and I love them, and I will always work with them. But if you want to transform the trajectory of a child's life, this has to be embedded in elementary schools. It has to be part of the norm and not the exception. Children's palates are formed at a young age. We have children in my elementary school in the middle of public housing who can tell you about arugula, who can tell you about eggplant, who have a palate for fine, fresh food, as opposed to the 35 flavors of flavored crap that's available in the bodega. That's changed. That's changed for a lifetime.
So who at the DOE listens to you?
Well, I think, number one, I listen to George. And again, I can't thank him enough. I think Stephen O'Brien has done a wonderful job within the structure he is placed in. And realize the DOE has a lot of moving pieces and a lot of.
Slow down a second. What does that mean in the structure he's placing? Because I know Stephen also, and I have my feelings about school food, or it's changed its name, the Office of Nutrition and School, or I can't remember what it is exactly. But tell me, there was something more about that. What is the structure like? Because a lot of people don't know.
Listen, first and foremost, it is just so big. Realize that, we're feeding 1.1, 1.2 million students a day. So the logistics of this are huge. A lot of schools were not really built to be able to prepare scratch food or to actually do fresh food. So it is a massive change that needs to happen around, a massive set of other priorities around instruction, pedagogy, hiring, teacher retention, school safety, school security. So I am always, mindful of the larger mandate of what school is, but I very much see how the pieces fit together. And again, part of that is taking all this energy from advocacy and nonprofit work and really putting it right into public schools so that, we don't have to outsource this work, that we can do it and build it as part of the fabric. And you're seeing, to the DOE's credit, you're seeing wonderful new schools. You're seeing wonderful programming happening, and the creation of new schools to include technology that allows for scratch cooking.
What are they doing wrong, though? What are they doing wrong? I know that's a tough question for you.
Yeah, that is a tough question.
But maybe not that. Not what they're doing wrong, but what could they be doing better? How about that?
Listen, well, again, you give me 15 George Edwards, and I guarantee you we'd have.
Yeah. So George Edwards. So let's talk about that. You've been very, George is a wonderful person, but what about what he's doing that you're so impressed with?
Okay, so first and foremost, he's writing grants. He is writing grants and working with schools that allow us to get the fresh fruit and vegetable program into schools. He has been the spearhead of getting schools fresh food, millions of dollars of food. We distribute 1,400 pieces of fresh fruit daily when school is open, in schools to classrooms because of George. The school garden to school cafe program, the New York State sourcing program, knowing where your food comes from. George visits more schools, teaches more school staff, serves more children, gets there to every single community than any other guy that I know, and he does it with a smile. That's what it's really about. It is about the human connection. It is really about the people power. It is moving away in some regards from the notion of, I'm going to send a newsletter. I'm going to send a document. I've spent so much time deleting email and reading stuff that makes no sense, that is repurposed and recycled information from other organizations under the pretense of being informative so you could ask for a donation, than one could ever imagine. Imagine if our days were spent with children, in the garden, in school, doing this work. That, to me, is what it's all about.
Less time trying to raise money.
Right. Not only less, and raise ourselves, raise our profile. Don't talk to me about imprints. Talk to me about impact. My best advocacy is, I think, my authenticity. You want to find Steve Ritz most days of the week, where he is, in a classroom with kids or with a teacher. That's authenticity. That's doing the work.
And what, we talked about a lot of the key indicators, and I know I keep beating this dead horse here. Sorry for the that metaphor, but what I don't feel the same optimism that you do. I see budget cuts in schools. I see a lot of things that are going to be taken away, and I feel like a lot of these kinds of programming around food and nutrition will be the first things that are kind of pushed aside. Am I wrong, or
you may very well be right. I am eternally optimistic because that's who I am, but I'm also I'm also eternally realistic. And that's why when I see organizations raising so much money for salaries, that to me is absurd. Salaries for real estate, salaries for media, salaries for marketing. Listen, that's not cool. You don't need to do that. No executive director of any organization should be making more than a school teacher. Otherwise, you're really sucking the incentive from public education to go work in the nonprofit space. If you're really true to your mission, listen, the calculus of my advocacy is not to be my brother's keeper. The calculus of my advocacy is to be my brother's brother, hand in hand, same place, same time, lockstep, together and supported.
So you talked about this, that you feel like a lot of nutrition education programs and food-related programs around schools, that they pay higher salaries than the Department of Education in New York City, and that clearly creates a conflict and takes talent away from the Department of Education.
Exactly, for sure.
You never pay more than a teacher's salary to anybody.
Right.
Or an administrator teacher's salary.
Correct.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I take no salary because I really believe that I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. So I take no salary for the work that I do, and I've dedicated my time to CS55 tirelessly for years, and I will continue to do so. But I don't expect people to do that. But I do expect people to understand that, you can't have huge salaries for nonprofits and ask people to donate for that. That to me is not scalable. So getting back to your point about, you're afraid about budget cuts, you're seeing things happen. There's going to be a thinning of the herd for sure. There is going to be a thinning of the herd. And that in the scheme of things may not be such a bad thing. I always like looking at the private sector. And really, the private sector really works. There has to be an ROI. And organizations that can generate an ROI are going to survive as nonprofits. And
the return of investment, the ROI,
right.
You see that as part of these key performance indicators, like improved grades, and is that what you're talking about?
Right. And behavioral outcomes aligned to academic outcomes. There have to be both. They have to be hand in hand. And there has to be teacher satisfaction and administrative buy-in. There has to be. That's how systemic change happens. There will always be champion teachers. And champion teachers and teachers, I salute each and every one of you because teachers change lives. But unless there is systemic buy-in, it's not going to happen. So how do you create systemic buy-in? By having small, scalable, replicable programs that really can become bigger. Listen, I have a small garden in my home. This technology scales up to be commercial very easily when schools are ready for it. But retaining talent, supporting talent, and engaging children in ways that they want to be involved make this whole thing more palatable.
What about swinging back to inequities, right? Income, racial, and so forth. You work in underserved in the South Bronx, right?
Correct.
So you've been to a lot of schools. What are the differences in public schools in let's say, an all-white area or what would be considered a wealthy community versus the underserved communities? What are your observational differences that concern you most?
Okay, so first and foremost, it's access to resources. A lot of schools in marginalized communities, they're older. They are simply older. The infrastructure is awful. Listen, my school building, it's a walk up. We're not even ADA accessible. The plumbing is bad. That's a fact. The electricity is bad. That's a fact. It's poorly wired for the internet. there are things in that school. The bathrooms need to be upgraded. These are things that people haven't thought about for thousands of years, hundreds.
Like, do they have, the fundamental resources that are being distributed, right? Like technology, whether it's laptops and whether it's water fountains, so they could fill up. Is it the same in those schools as all other schools?
So I think it's important to really understand the difference between equity and equality. Those are two very different things because
Talk about that.
So, I always say equity is me and a little child walking up to a fence and trying to see what's over it, and we're doing it equally. We're there. Equity is making sure that child can see from the same vantage point that I can by providing a stool, a ladder, or something to elevate that child so we're at the same vantage point. I pulled some interesting data, and it's interesting that in communities that basically, when you talk about health, 20% of a student's health actually has to do with treatment, what they get from a doctor. 10% has to do with physical environment, 30% has to do with the behaviors they see in their community, and 40% has to do with their socioeconomic status. So when you look at how health outcomes and educational outcomes, are distributed, wow. Listen, in my community, education is so important. I'm so proud. I want to shout out Mohamedou's sister. She just got a free ride to Penn State, so she's watching. Congratulations. We are so proud of you. First high school graduate and off to college, pre-med on a full ride. I'm hoping she goes to Howard. But in my community, listen, safety, security, food, these are some of the biggest priorities, that come first. Realize this. I got another nutty statistic for you. According to New York City, Department of Health in 2018, 83% of public housing has serious health violations, infestation, mold, asbestos. Think about what that's doing to those children. Think about how these children's sleeping patterns have been, disturbed, by the constant construction, what we call the ghetto bird, the incessant lights that are out there, to supposedly reduce crime.
What is it? What is it called?
We call them the ghetto birds. Ghetto birds are those big, large lighting structures.
Oh, I know what the lights are. I know those lights.
Those lights are on 24/7. If you're 10 people in a small 2-bedroom apartment, try getting to normal sleeping habits. The way construction is done in marginalized communities would never happen on the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side. The way construction projects are finished would never happen. The squeaky wheels get the grease, and that tends to be parents of privilege and advocacy. You even look at distance learning right now. There are students in certain communities that are on that computer from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And if they deviate from that screen, the teacher knows and that parent is getting a zing. There are other communities where parents don't always have access to the laptop, don't always have access to the internet. And so long as their child checks in at, online, that's considered attendance. So we are going to literally see this great digital divide exacerbate the differences between the haves and the have-nots. I'm spooky about that. I'm scared about that. You can't eat a laptop. So the first thing that we did at Green Bronx Machine, everyone saw, I'm doing Zoom this, I'm doing Zoom that. We have a Zoom cooking program that delivers the food to the students before they get online so that every child has the ingredients. I'm seeing all this Zoom stuff where it's really celebrities and a lot of brands trying to insert themselves. So kids are watching this stuff. There's really no supervision, but what are they seeing? They're seeing the clothes, the sneakers, and all the objects that people have told them are so important being objectified on screen instead of really being actively engaged. And that to me is spooky. I'm a huge advocate for the community school movement. And, I want to make a point clear. I am not anti-DOE. There is nothing more important to me than the Department of Education and public school education. What I have been against for years is what I see as incompetence, negligence, nepotism, and corruption. So I love public schools.
And you see that, let's say.
And that's human behavior. That's not the
From
Department of
1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a lot, and 1 being not a lot, how much of there is that in the schools?
It is better now than it has ever been.
1 to 10, though, Stephen.
1 to 10, I don't think we're perfect, but
No, meaning 10 being a lot of nepotism, a lot of the description you just gave.
I think it's far below 5, maybe a 2 or a 3, but
Okay,
realize
okay.
I've learned to be a better advocate about what's important to me. And I got to give credit to certain people who have mentored me, because that's been my process. You can't drink out of a fire hose. And for a long time, I was screaming. Because it was appalling to go into these schools and see how these children were treated and how everything else but the children was the priority.
Has it gotten better in
It has
general?
gotten so much better.
But not just your school, but in other schools.
Across the board. And it's interesting. I will say that every school or every principal that I've spoken out about has either been closed or been fired. So I might have been right. I was just probably not the best advocate for that at the time.
Since we're running tight on time, I want to ask a few other tight questions. First of all, overall macro perspective, okay, how do we fix this? And I don't, not generalities, specifics, and from a policy perspective, how do we change this immediately? What can we do? What are your thoughts? And let's talk South Bronx. Let's talk Brownsville. Let's talk, some of these, underserved communities where they have high levels of obesity, high levels of diabetes, socioeconomic disadvantage.
Great.
Let's talk about those communities.
Number one, let's talk about zoning. Let's restrict the amount of fast food restaurants that are being allowed to come into communities, because what do we know? They suck up everything and kill people. And I'm not listening.
Okay, when I say that to people, you know what their answer is? You shouldn't tell me how I should eat. Shut up.
That's great. But what I'm saying is we should look at the data. Right now with COVID, we have...
But I want you to respond to that, because I am a big advocate for restricting fast food restaurants and limiting them in comparison to supermarkets and healthy fresh food. But I'm often shut down, and I assume you are too. But maybe it's harder to shut you down than me. Tell me what the answer to that is.
Because that as a standalone is not the answer, because there's a reason why that's happening. And that's happening because, number one, landlords are being able to get away with speculative and predatory practices. So how do you prevent this from happening from a policy point of view? What you do is, I believe that any vacant space, landlords, that, number one, they want the tax write-off. What you should do is, if a landlord doesn't reduce the rent within 6 months on a vacant storefront, he should be fined. You got a dirty sidewalk, they're fined. You got an empty storefront, it should be fined. Similarly, a lot of this is speculation. They're holding on to these properties because they know fast food is coming. Imagine if we allowed these landlords to donate that property for the full tax write-off towards a nonprofit, towards a community farm, towards a for-purpose, impact-driven organization.
Or
game-changing. You'd have a blended community.
If they rent to those organizations, maybe they could get no property tax. I mean, we could give these...
Right. Policy has got to change. Another thing, let's really look at, in communities, how they are accessing and using food stamps. Listen, if you are a 6-foot storefront with a 7-foot bong in the window, you should not be allowed to have food stamps accepted in your zone. I'm not saying no bongs and no whatever hookah pipes in the windows. You can, but you shouldn't be having children in those stores, and EBT transactions should not be allowed there. We should be mandating that stores.
Just for clarity, a bong is a marijuana pipe.
I don't need to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the Chihuly Glass Pipe Museum. I can go and see that in marginalized communities. And it's amazing that these little children know what these things are for. They don't know about this in wealthy communities. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's a well-kept secret. It's appropriate. It's where it is. And I have a lot of thoughts about legalization, and that's a whole nother concept. But these huge storefronts that have, all this paraphernalia, just no food stamps. Let's send children to healthier stores. Let's send families to healthier stores. You can't have the best of both worlds and eat it too. Stores that are taking food stamps, they need to have a percentage of fresh food. We need to figure out what that percentage of fresh food is available in that store so parents have that option. We can't keep looking at children as epicenters of profit. And that's exactly what we're doing with some of these policies that are perpetuating it. I am not against someone who comes off a late night shift buying a beer at 8 o'clock in the morning. But I feel that bodegas and supermarkets within 3 blocks of a school, of a public school, should not be selling beer at 8 o'clock in the morning. If you want food stamps, if you want to take food stamps, I think it's egregious for children who go into these stores to see people in this behavior. And not because the behavior is wrong, it's just what they see at a young age. That would never happen in communities of wealth and privilege. That's a start.
So it sounds like you're running for office. Is that true? Are you interested in politics? Would you run for office? And if so, as what?
Never say never. Never say never. I am running for president of the Children's Union. So that is a title that, if it's about children and the safety, health, and welfare of children, you can count me in. I've got a lot of work to do in public schools, and I'm really proud of that. I'm so proud of some of the partners that, have made this work so inspiring for me and continue to make it inspiring for me and continue to make it impactful. I'm also, I could give you a list of schools, of principals across the city who are doing amazing work, having nothing to do with me, by following a virtuous path, by learning how to embed a local nonprofit into their school and then building around it instead of having, people come from elsewhere. A guy, I have data here for days I pulled up. I want to shout out Jeff Palladino from Fannie Lou Hamer High School. The one principal who offered me a job, who when he offered it to me 15 years ago, I thought he was crazier than me, and I never took the job. He runs one of the most effective high schools in one of the most marginalized communities in the city, and his data is off the hook. And I mean, these are
What's it attributed to, though, Stephen? What's it attributed to?
Leadership and community engagement. Jeff, laser vision, and here's the deal. Even in my own work, I used to scream a lot about a lot of things, and that was not too effective. People knew, I was that guy screaming. Now I am laser focused on what I do. A guy like Jeff, laser focused on what he does. A guy like Ed Tom, the Bronx Center for Science and Mathematics, crushing it. It's probably the real Bronx High School of Science in the middle of the South Bronx, in a public school. A guy like Dennis Kogan out in Staten Island, advocating for special needs children around the whole Maker Faire movement. Incredible work. Carol Harriman, ISPS 30 in Brooklyn, one of the most inclusive schools in one of the most challenged communities. God bless her and the work that she does.
Speaking of academic programs and so forth, I know that, you do this work internationally, right? So UAE, Egypt, Qatar, or Qatar, Canada, like these people came to you, and how does that work? And a lot of these schools are wealthy schools, correct?
Some are and some aren't.
Yeah.
I think, your advocacy is your authenticity, and your authenticity is your advocacy. So remarkably, while I was doing work in the South Bronx, yes, I do a lot of work in Dubai for public schools. I'm proud to be faculty at ESOL Education for Fairgreen International School. And the government of Dubai was watching me from afar. And what did they see at CS 55? They saw happy, healthy children going to school. And that was something they wanted to emulate. ESOL Education, one of the private school people that I work with for, they actually took proposals that I had for the Board of Education years ago that the Board of Ed thought were too bizarre, and have now become top 20 schools in the world. They took those proposals and have implemented them. This whole community school movement, which we're seeing as the big renaissance, and a big kudos to the community school movement, because I think it works. I really do think it works. I was screaming that 20, 30 years ago, and people thought I was
for those listening, exactly what do you mean by community school movement? Exactly.
So the community school movement really turns a school, usually in a poor performing district or poor performing area of a district, into a hub for all kinds of services. So it's one-stop shopping, because what people don't realize is being poor is a full-time occupation. It is so hard to be a poor person in New York City, between childcare, appointments, work, if you can find work, transportation. Listen, my school is 18 blocks from the subway. Try getting to work on time and keeping appointments. And if you have 2 children attending different schools. So turning schools into community hubs inclusive of all of the services, is absolutely essential.
Got it. Okay. And
I'll shout out the Qatar Foundation. The mission is easy. Qatar Foundation is really helping. I didn't know this, but Arabic is the 5th most spoken language in the world. We have so many Arabic speaking students in New York City, and the work that they are doing to support Arabic language instruction aligned to whole school performance is amazing.
And what do you learn from these, let's say, call them privileged schools, that you bring back to the South Bronx and to other underserved communities?
So
specifically.
I'm gonna flip that. I'm gonna tell you what I've learned from nonprofits that make me more effective overseas. I'm gonna shout out a hero of our movement, a dear friend, Karen Washington. People forget how smart, how dedicated, and how much of a visionary she was. Okay, and what is she doing?
She still is.
And she still is. She still is. But she's not embedded in the nonprofit space. She's doing wonderful philanthropic work. But what is she really doing? She's stewarding the earth. She's running a farm. She's feeding people, and she's running a business.
And she's a great advocate.
And she's a great advocate. I'm going to shout out another local rock star, Dr. Robert Graham. Look at him. Here was a guy who was succeeding, prescribing a pill for an ill at the pinnacle of his profession, and said, enough, and literally walked away. God bless him.
And I love Robert. He's amazing. I want to focus on what is some
So I look at what people, when they buck the system, that's what this is about. It's not about incremental change. It is really about wholesale change. What's scalable, what's replicable, and how people are challenging the limit.
What were you able to bring to, let's say, Fairgreen in Dubai? That's in Dubai?
Yeah.
Sustainable city. So, what things were you able to bring in there that worked? What didn't work? Were there?
Right. So what works? What do we know everywhere? Project-based learning works. If children have a project, something they can touch, taste, feel, and see, aligned to something the teachers can assess, be recursive about, and go forward, that works. Listen, Dubai could build anything they want, but they're using the technology that I have in my living room that's available for under $1,000, which is remarkable. They love the innovation. We had to innovate in Green Bronx Machine. I can't get a kitchen put into my school. It would take me years. We came up with the Green Bronx Machine mobile classroom kitchen. Literally a DOE, USDA, approved piece of technology that is a food truck on wheels for 1/10 the cost with no exhaust, that is plug and play, that you can use tomorrow. Those are the answers, and they're using it in classroom after classroom.
This is in Dubai.
This is in Dubai. It's around the world. What it really is.
And by the way, how much of those mobile units cost roughly?
$6,000, including a TV broadcast station. Go figure. And guess what? You can carry it up the stairs. City Harvest is using them. The work that we're focused on, the work that I'm focused on, is not about my organization. It is about the world. It is about creating technology, pedagogy, and support systems that work. It's not the addiction model. Again, you get a lifetime site license, you get data, you get all these things that really help you become a better person, whatever it is. And that's what I want to advocate for.
So, Stephen, this has been great. And, I love you.
We're out of time. I haven't even taken a breath yet.
I like to end on time. I want to thank you so much. It's so meaningful to have this conversation with you. And I mean that sincerely. And this is basically, we don't see the audience. We don't even know who's there. This is basically, the types of conversations that Stephen and I often, have. I want to thank you all for coming today, especially with very busy, complicated schedules and the tension that's going on. And thank you for the fascinating discussion, Stephen. It was great. I want to make sure that everybody checks out nycfoodpolicy.org. Make sure to sign up for our weekly news and research digest and check out our site.
It's the best piece of literature out there, and everybody steals it.
I hope you don't delete it.
Right, I don't delete yours. I want to wish it. I'd like to.
We want everybody to steal it.
Yeah, well, it's great. Just give you credit instead of pretending it's theirs and asking for a donation. I want to wish everybody a happy Father's Day, but also take time to acknowledge those without fathers because of a really unjust system. And on that, to think about this, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for tuning in. The degree to which you resist injustice is the degree to which we are free. And if you are not standing with and for the oppressed, you are sitting at the table with the oppressors. The opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity. because even a dead fish can go with the flow. So I urge all of you to get out there and swim, make a difference. Don't limit your challenge the limits, and be as disruptive and innovative as possible. Thank you. God bless you. Follow us on Green Bronx Machine and Stephen Ritz. Check out some of the stuff we're doing. We're here to inspire. We're here to perspire, and we're here to work with you. So God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great, great day and weekend.
Thank you kindly.